Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. And I don't know, you can see it, but it doesn't mean as much to you as it does to me. But the bandana is on, and that means gaming is on. My guest this time is one of my favorite GMs to play with at cons, Colin Dimock. Colin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, you shouldn't be, really. And that bandana joke, explain the gaming bandana briefly.
Okay, real briefly. It started a long time ago. It actually started when I was first pitching game designs for board games, tabletop board games. And I'm not always good at recognizing people. And so I figured it would be a good strategy for me to make myself very recognizable. So the first cons I went to, I always wore the bandana. And that's meant that I've been stuck with the bandana ever since, because that's how people know who I am. It also makes me visible in a crowd, so it's been helpful. It's worked really well, actually. But it's been 15 years now, or something more than 15 years now that I've been stuck with the bandana at cons, because that was the choice of me.
But I love how it's almost like the armor comes on at the start of battle. How at the beginning of the con the bandana comes on. So, what was your intro to GMing?
So, long ago in the 70s, before role-playing was really well known, I had already become fascinated with tabletop game design. I've been bitten by the bug through my brother and through the old Avalon Hill box board games. So that was where I started. But I had made this game in junior high school called 10 Continents, in which you play a wizard and you go around, you're basically Gandalf the Grey. You play a wizard and you go around the countryside gathering up various forces and allies so it's an exploration game, and you're eventually trying to take out the big bad and whatever. And I played it with my buddy Pat. It was the first game I ever made that I played with another person, and we played it fairly extensively. At some point, I decided that I wanted to make it in a smaller scale. I wanted to be a little bit more like Fellowship of the Ring. We had, the Night Walkers. And so the first thing I had this chart of weapons and armor and what that would do. And I had these pages and whatever, and I started making it. Turned out to be a total mess, way too complicated. It was just, it just didn't work. And so I kind of put that in the whole bin and kind of went on. And later that year, I had been hearing about Dungeons and Dragons, but I had yet to meet anybody who could really tell me about it. I got a very bad explanation from a young woman I asked who I had heard had some experience, but she wasn't that into it. So the explanation I got was very garbled. But that Christmas, my buddy got the old basic D&D set, the blue box.
The pink box.
Yeah, well, the pink box. The blue box.
Or was it the? Yeah, I think it. Well.
But whatever, it was that. He got it for Christmas. He broke it open. He ran the little in the rules tiny dungeon for me a bit. I actually died on the first day. My character died on the first day, and I went home and said, "That's what I was trying to do." Oh my gosh, that's what I was trying to do. I got out that stuff from my thing and made my first role-playing game. And I think he and I played maybe 1 or 2 sessions of D&D after that, and everything else was a system that became called to be old fantasy that we ran for an embarrassing number of decades.
And so were you sort of always the GM in that thing, kind of the de facto?
No, I mean, it started that way, but my friend Pat started DMing a little bit there. But Nick, who started DMing very heavily, was quite good. Really great world and non-player builder, much better with non-players than I think. And Claude, he runs in it, and several people have run in that system. Matt Nolan, who met at the con. Well, you might not have met because he's only been at the con. But he's run it. Mike Holcomb's run it. So several people have ended up running that system as it's turned out. All people I know, it's not intended for publishing.
So what mechanically drew you to that system? To like, I have this theory in sort of that GMs pick specific systems to tell specific stories.
I think that you should. they don't have access to a lot of systems or awareness of a lot of systems. And that's not no fault of their own. They'll learn eventually. But you should, because different systems do different things. And, I've continued to design role-playing games for different purposes, ever since. I've got notes on my table right now of stuff I was working on before this call. And they do different things. They drive the players to do different things and give them different choices. They frame the whole world in a different way. It's almost like a different genre of novel or movie or something like that. So I had started with my own thing, and there was a lot of very unique things to that system. But I became very influenced extremely early. So when I first made it, they were all one-shots. You had a dungeon was the challenge. The other person would make their group of characters and try and beat that challenge. And then you'd say yay or boo or whatever. And then I ran into, I think like 2 years after something, I ran into the Fantasy Trip, which was originally published in the 3 magazines. And I never played the Fantasy Trip, but it greatly influenced me because it was the first time I encountered a skill-based system. And I had already been extremely critical of the class-level systems in D&D. I was critical of a number of things of D&D. Very, very early. This is precocious junior high school me. Very critical of the design in D&D. The DM's Guide came out, and I said, "Well, this is a train wreck of a book. What are you supposed to do with this thing?"
And the organization of that book fascinates me. How you can literally turn a page and go from here's how much it costs to build a castle to here's what happens to spells underwater. Like the next page.
Right. Oh, and by the way, if you're flying, there's a whole movement rules. Now you have to get a hex paper to have a flying
maneuverability classes and all that.
You don't use it anywhere else. And grappling was just a nightmare mess because it's a system that uses percentage. It doesn't work like anything else in the entire game. And they just stuck it in. Yep. Are you aware of podcaster Ben Riggs?
Yeah.
Plot Points. And he's been doing this thing during the pandemic where he and his buddy, they're for those who don't know, Ben Riggs does a lot of D&D history. That's his big thing. But they also review various games. It's a good podcast. I've enjoyed it. He also did a small book on drive-thru called Encounter Theory, which is supposed to guide the way you run modules and adventures. And I think that I've got a copy. I've never used Encounter Theory to actually do it because I'm just too set in my ways. But I believe that he is on the right track, if not correct, in what he says. In any case, he and his other D&D historian buddy have been reading word for word the DM's Guide in 1-hour sessions.
Oh,
and the two of them are younger than I. And so they still think of it as being semi-divine, right? Because this is that goes to the past and
right. This is what is it? This is is it the Apotheosis? The lost book that supposed to explain everything?
That is exactly the experience that they go into that book with. They even talk about that in the experience. But one of them had read it but wasn't really that familiar with it, or had read some of it or whatever, because he runs a lot of old school Revolution stuff, though he admits that you do not run real old school stuff. You run the new systems that replicate old school better than old school was. And Ben Riggs had never read it. But so they decided to do this, and they both approached it with this reverence. And from the first page for the forward, they're like, "What's going on?" And they're trying not to talk bad about it because, they don't want to, be heretics and down-talk the saints of the origins of role-playing. But it is a mess, and now they can't. I mean, they've done 8 sessions, and they're 15 pages in or something. There's a lot of talk.
Yeah, that's gonna go on for a while.
It's going on for quite a while. But yeah, it was a freaking mess. And as a 7th grader, I recognized that it was almost unusable material. And I even had a parody monster once. I called it Gygaxian Worm. It's just got all these random powers pieced into it. And so when I ran into the Fantasy Trip, even though I never ran it, I looked at that skill-based system and said, "This is how I want to make characters. I want to be able to choose what my character does." And so I very quickly went from one-shots to continuous and a skill-based system where, with the idea that you could make whatever character you wanted and really tried to set the system up flexibility-wise so that you could, if you had an idea, you could come close to replicating that idea on the table. It's really
And that ties in nicely to something that's near and dear to both of our hearts, which is Call of Cthulhu. Which I often say that for me, Call of Cthulhu, but BRP, really basic role playing, is like a lingua franca for gamers. Where because my goal when I'm running a game is to get the rules out of the way, and telling somebody that they have a 40% chance to do something is something that anybody can just internalize. That's a lot easier than you need to check this table and do this, and you've got these modifiers. And so that's one of the reasons that I really like BRP as a system. And it's got that skill-based thing, especially as they've gotten into later editions more and more. But so what sort of got you into GMing Call of Cthulhu?
It's actually a very specific random event. So I already said that. So since I've designed games, a lot of my time spent playing board games and role-playing games has been of my own designs to perfect those designs or whatever it is, or just for fun. I recognized at some point, it's about the time that I donned the bandana for the first time, I recognized at some point that I need to be more out there. I need to be meeting other people. I need to be, talking to publishers. I need to be doing all this stuff. And I did a little research and found that Kubicon at that time had a very strong showing from publishers and a lot of lecture series on game design and that kind of stuff. Ernst still does that kind of stuff there. A lot of it has dried up, but they still have some of it going on. And nowadays it's all about proto-spills anyways. So I was really excited to go there. And I wanted to convince Nick to come with me because I was a little apprehensive when I hadn't been to a con in many years. We'll just say many years. And so I wanted to convince him. And so, he was up for it. I was going to pay for the hotel, but that was okay. We're going to do this and that. And to talk him into, I asked him, well, what was he interested in doing? And he had two things on his list. One was dice. He wanted to get some more dice, and they dried up the local game stores. And he said, "Do you think that they'll have dice?" I said, "I'm sure. I'm sure they got dealers. They're going to have dice there. You'll get your chance to get the dice." It turned out to be Dice Nirvana.
The bucket of dice.
The Chessex booth that they run there is just like with the little lights.
Oh yeah.
So that came true. The other thing he wanted to do was try Call of Cthulhu again. Late Call of Cthulhu. Okay, we'll make it happen. So we drove up, get there Friday evening, early evening. We left early from work and got it there in time for the first slot, which is like a 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock slot. I don't remember. Got through the line, all that, whatever. It's just coming up. We asked, okay, there was a Call of Cthulhu event at 6. And we asked, okay, so what do you do to get this? Well, there's this thing called the Shuffler, but blah, blah, blah. This is the zero session. So it's first come, first serve. Just go to that place. It's first come, first serve. So we go to the room, and there's this woman who's the keeper. That's what they call it. Call it keepers. But the GM. She's the GM. And there are 12 people crammed in this room, all looking really pissed off. And so what had happened is some of the con staff had told them it was first come, first serve. Others had a sign-up sheet. And so they had two full tables of players, all of them who believed that they had every right to be there. And so there was already some animosity and tension. Me and Nick walked in and say, "Any space for us?" And just got the look of death from everybody in the room, right? Just everybody's looking. So we tried the entire weekend to get the Call of Cthulhu. We failed the entire weekend. It was cramped full, as you know, that can happen. The Bay Area has a really strong Call of Cthulhu gaming scene, I think. Never had purple filling tables. So I decided after that, I said, well, there is obviously a need for Call of Cthulhu games. It's pretty clear that the demand is higher than the supply. So next year I'm going to run. So
you made the shameless marketing decision of.
Well, I was interested in it, but I decided, this is the thing, and I found soon after that a copy of the 5th edition rules in a used bookstore of all places, and off I went. Now, that next year I come and I That was the first convention game I ever ran. And it was the first time I ran Call of Cthulhu. Actually, it wasn't, because I ran the scenario as a test back home. So it was the second time I ran Call of Cthulhu. It was like the Friday night of my second.
And now you've built, so folks might not know this, but Colin has this troubadour following of people who you now have a pre-con every year where people are jockeying to get in. They run, I think it's 3 Call of Cthulhu games, you and Nick and maybe somebody else, and you'll
just me and Nick right now.
and they'll run, and people fight to get in these games on the Friday night, and Thursday night, right? Sorry, because Friday is the first day.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll say, like, I have so enjoyed. I find the way that you run games, I really enjoy it. I really love. You have a very nice way of being breezily intricate that brings, I think, a real flavor to the game that I really enjoy.
Yeah,
But
my LinkedIn profile, if I ever remember the password.
So what is it about? Is it the system? Is it the mythos? Is it, what is it that really kind of keeps you coming back to that?
So I'll start from the most important thing, which is really that Call of Cthulhu fairly consistently, especially up in the Bay Area, attracts the players that I want to play with. That's more than anything the thing, because I run a lot of genres, and in the con circuit, I am known for Call of Cthulhu, and people expect it, and it's hard for me to run anything else, to be honest. Which is fine. I don't do it a lot at home. Most of my Call of Cthulhu is convention run, so it works out fine. But it's really because of that group. I don't know that I think the group that the scene is as strong in Los Angeles, where I'm at. When I've run local concerts, it's been fine, but it's not the same as the vibe up there.
We got to get you to Big Bad Con, man.
I do plan to go to Big Bad Con. I've been talking about it for a little while because Big Bad Con would give me a chance to try some of the systems I haven't tried out. So
well, and Big Bad Con gives you that feeling of everybody at this table is awesome in every game you're in. It's the best. Something you said. No. But something you said there, I think, it does attract role players. I think that's right. But I think it's also, I think it attracts people who, I don't know how to say this non-pejoratively, don't have a D&D mindset.
Well, let me rephrase that for you.
Yeah.
So one of the things about Call of Cthulhu players is that they understand the fundamental very well, which is it's just as fun to fail as it is to succeed.
It's a great way to put it.
Just as much laughter and rolls of delight when you roll double zeros as when you roll 0-1.
Yeah. So I run a Cthulhu game on stream. A lot of I've been doing it for quite a while. 75% of my GMing is just waiting for my players to fumble and then deciding what crazy thing happens when they fumble. Like I ran last night and literally 3 times the players fumbled, and that completely changed the story.
Yeah, and that can happen. I also, some of the reasons I do it for a convention, I think it's a great system for one shots. As you kind of alluded to, it's really quick to teach and pretty easy to teach. That people are expecting a high death count out of it, so that you don't have to worry quite so much about balancing, what we call balancing or whatever. You have to balance things in a different way, but you don't have to worry about that so much. It's expected. It draws the right people fairly fast. You don't get into long, drawn-out combats for the most part. It's really, at its fundamental, Call of Cthulhu, we talk about it in terms of existential horror, but it's really about solving a mystery. You could adopt the mechanics very easily to do a detective game if you wanted to. There's probably better ways to do it, but you could, because it is, at the base of it, we're going to solve this mystery.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think it's interesting because it's nominally a horror game, but I find it's much more a psychological trauma game than anything else. Especially running a campaign versus running a one-shot is a totally different experience in Call of Cthulhu, because in a one-shot, you're a rental car. and you're going to use that character like what, and sure, I'll go in that basement, what the hell do I care? But in a campaign, it becomes a much different experience of sort of living with the shared trauma that this poor group of probably monsters by this point have gone through.
And so I think that there are ways I think it's important to also, there's ways to get people to attach the characters a little bit more in one shots. And it comes to being specific and giving them those specific elements. And people, especially if you do the build right at the beginning, people have a chance to get a little bit invested in their character. And that makes them a little less reckless. Now,
yeah. I think relationships are the key to that. Like building in strong relationships between your players. I actually, have you ever played Jason Morningstar's Shah-Bahiri Roach?
No, I haven't. I've read people's reviews or discussions.
So the shtick of that, one of the shticks of that fabulous game, it's the most aberrant role-playing experience you'll ever have. But the shtick that I love from that game that I've actually stolen for when I make con scenarios is that every player has a strong positive association with the player to their right and a strong negative association with the player on their left. And so I will make little diagrams, and I'll say, and when I write out your character, okay, here's something positive you feel about that person, and here's something negative you feel about that person. We have our first cat appearance. But that shorthands the relationship, and it gives the players a reason to care about those other characters.
Right, and so when I'm writing, I do a lot of character maps. So when I'm doing those characters that I set up, I do a lot of character maps so that you have that stuff built in. And often in the write-up, I give some small interactive thing that the characters want to do right at the beginning that has nothing to do necessarily with just to start them.
Give an example of that.
Well, I mean, it can be as simple as you could say, such and such and such and such. He still owes you $20 from last night.
That's a hook right away. That's a hook.
That's it. That's a hook. And the whole purpose of that, and nobody cares how much money you have for the most part in Call of Duty games, right? It doesn't come up very often. But that gives you a reason to go, hey, Jim, you gonna give me that $20? And then you've got two players talking. And this is the character-player barrier. And this is how people get invested, right? Once you start reducing that character and player barrier, they start infusing. And they start interacting with another player, maybe a player they've never met before. And so they only know that player as the construct of the character-player interface that they're projecting. But it gives their reason to go talk to them, and they start bonding. The person says, screw you, I'm not giving you $20. Or the person says, and I might have laid a trap in the writing on there kind of thing, or I might have, done, positive, negative, whatever. I'll do a bunch of those. But they'll have some reason to react to that. Or some little thing. I have a Call of Duty adventure I wrote that is taking place entirely during, almost all backstage during a production of Macbeth. And I actually based one of the characters on you, which is why this would jump to mind. And he's the stage manager. Technically, he's the assistant stage manager, but he's the stage manager. And right at the beginning of the scenario, he's got people he's got to talk to, the things that got to get done, because it's about curtain time, right? And so he's got reason to start connecting. Boom, 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 boom. And other people are doing that thing. Oh, you left this. Oh, you did this. So you got boom, boom, boom. All this, trying to create that nervous energy that happens in a stage production right before curtain goes up and before everybody calms down and settles into what they're actually doing. But it gives people relationships. So you write these characters, but you can't predict what the player's going to bring to that, to fuse into that character. And that's the joy of it. Seeing, when you run a Call of Duty scenario several times, you get to see, 6 different versions of the same character. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Entertaining for me. I enjoy it quite a lot.
So when you're creating a scenario, to me, there are kind of 3 silos that are the entree to the scenario. And so there's either the characters, there's the setup, or there's the denouement, for lack of a better term. And so does one of those 3 sort of grab and lead you through the process? Because I know for me, I am 100% a setup guy. Like I will get an image in my head, and then I'll just start building characters around it, and then I always have a third act problem.
So, boy, there's a lot there I can comment right off the bat. So typically, it starts with an idea, and it might be an image, it might be a moment. I mean, it might be a still, or it might be a moment image, or it might be a character, a thing, or a monster, a thing. Some seed starts. That's the grain of sand inside the adventure writing oyster. So once I start with that, I have to. So it really goes back to me about advice I heard about writing your first novel. Someone, I don't remember who this quote's from, but someone said that your first novel should be a mystery. And the reason that your first novel should be a mystery is because when you're writing a mystery, you have to know as the author exactly what happened before you start writing. Right? You have to, it forces you to work through those details. And of course, there's two kind of schools of thoughts of writers. Either you design characters and see where they go, or you design a plot. Both have their strengths and weaknesses, and this explains the mess between. I read an article on the mess that created between the showrunners and Martin for Game of Thrones. Because Martin's absolutely a great characters and they go off and do things. Showrunners have to get a story arc.
Yeah, TV has to like push forward.
You have to do it, and so you have these two things butting heads. I have lots of other commentary on that, which we will not do here. Okay, so that's what happens is that goes into me having to understand exactly what the plot is and what's happening, and starting to write complications to that because you don't want things to be obvious, right? Just like if you're writing a mystery, right? There's got to be red herrings, or it's going to be a really bad mystery and a short one. So I start with that and start the understanding. And you asked once, how long does it take to write? And it takes me quite a while to write a convention scenario because I take it fairly seriously. But most of that time is the pondering stage. So when I'm driving home from work and thinking, so how did the demon get in the closet anyways? Wouldn't if somebody have seen it go in the closet? And so there has to be a reason. So all the things have to have a reason, and then you start understanding what kind of characters, you start getting images of characters that might be entertaining in the scenario, both non-players and players. All these pieces start to come together in your mind, and then that's when I start with the diagram. So I think of it in terms of scenes, typically, which are kind of centering points for you as a DM, the scenes that you have in your mind. And the scenes there's a bunch of critical stuff that you have to have in the scenes. Because the mystery, when you're writing a mystery, like Call of Cthulhu, you need a trail of clues. There's Tally again.
Yeah.
Up the staircase towards the high window. Little myth that he's the only cat who got stuck in here. So you have to put that breadcrumb trail of clues, and to do that, you need to put them in a context, and those are typically in scenes. So your scenes are typically to provide clues or resolve a problem or element, right? That's typically what scenes do. The opening scene, as we kind of alluded to, is really to get the characters going with each other. So that's what the scenes really do for you. And it's really important that scenes point to other scenes. And it's really important that anything that you have, those clues, you can get multiple ways. The other thing I do very early in the process is I come up with 4 very different ways the scenario can be solved. Like, I'll have a unlikely to succeed violent approach. I'll have a science approach. I'll have a magic approach. I'll have a talking your way through it. Whatever it is, I'll come up with like 4 different ways, and that helps me have different characters wear different hats, different options. It also lets me complicate the clues in ways that different people are going to see a scene, a murder scene, or whatever, different ways because this guy's playing the physicist, this guy's playing the psychic. Right?
I love that. So I've never heard that from you before, and that is that's such a great way to make sure that all your players matter You know, because like I definitely fall into the trap of like I just make the characters I want to make, and then there's a guy who's like, I speak French, you know, and so the intentionality that you bring to that. I want to just scrap all of our notes and talk about scenario design for an hour because this is really interesting to me.
It's actually I spent a lot of time writing scenarios. This is another subject of GMing, how much prep should you do. It's a whole topic, and you can go online and get all sorts of advice in contrary directions. I prep a lot, and I feel that it is really important when I'm running Call of Cthulhu. So, sorry if I'm reframing my one thought multiple times here, but there's a lot of people who really favor the kind of improv style, which is fine and really great. Which I know that you're in that school, and it's great and it does really well at certain cuts. Just like some systems do better at some things than other things. When I'm running Call of Cthulhu, I want the people to feel that the universe is not about them, that the universe is going to go on outside of them and does not care for them. It is cold and whatever, and if they misstep, they're going to step into traffic, bam, they're going to get hit. And so there has to be this feeling that the rules are rigid. And when I say rules, I don't mean the game mechanic rules. I mean the rules of the scenario, that there's rigidity. Now, in addition to that, they have to be weird. They have to be inexplicable to the players. And this is, we talk about building horror. And I don't think you can actually build fear in a role-playing game. I just don't think the environment is right to make people actually scared. Though I have had people have bad dreams afterwards. But what you can do is make it uncomfortable. And if you make it uncomfortable and specific, you're providing the soil with the environment, and you're providing the seeds of these descriptions, these specific moments, these taboos. I love to violate taboos in the scenario. I have a wonderful scenario where the players are kind of semi-working against these nuns that are trying to capture and eat a baby. And the nuns have a very good reason why they're trying to do that. They have their own thing going on. But from the player perspective, that's just not good. I gotta let this kitty cat out of the room.
Yeah, sure. Take a sec. I think that the framing of the scenario, like I'm fascinated about how much you actually write down when you're doing this. Like, do you approach it like a printed scenario?
No, in a sense, no. And in fact, people have asked me to publish scenarios, and it's hard to do because I'd actually have to write out.
Right.
So it's really, I have so many different directions I could go just off of that comment. But so I commented, it's like writing a mystery novel, right? But good role playing is not the same. Writing a novel, that's a different medium than role playing is. And film's yet another medium. So the process that I use is I write the novel in my mind, in a sense. I know what scenes I'm expecting the player to. I have never once had a game go the way that it went in my head. Never, ever happens. So, you've got this different player and character relationship that you built, in your mind, and you have this wonderful tool called dice that create these random results, and all of a sudden madness happens because somebody rolled double zeros at the wrong time, or whatever random things. And I love having that random element that spurs the creativity. So I write in terms of those scenes because I need to understand the world. But once you've written it, then you let it go. Once it hits the table, do not try and make your story happen. That's not the point. The point is so that when you write that story in your mind, you have a wealth of details, often visual, in your mind, and relationships, and all these different elements that you have in your mind. So when somebody does something completely unexpected, they kind of say, "Oh yeah, what kind of car does that guy drive?" I don't have written down, blue Honda Accord. I don't have that written down anywhere. But I know who the character is. I may have even had, if the car is relevant at all, I may have a visual of what that car is or whatever. I've got more details in my head than on paper by far.
If you really want to have fun, If they ask what kind of car he drives, ask the player, what kind of car do you think he drives?
Well, see, and I don't do that. That's your style, not my style. And the reason I don't do that is I don't want them to feel empowered in
Right.
that way, right, in Call of Cthulhu game. I want the players to feel empowered in the way their character is empowered, not in having any kind of control over this universe, which does not care for them. And it's very different from kind of some of the modern storytelling role-playing.
But what you do so well is you take that kind of restrictive, old school, and I'm using pejoratives, mindset, but you do it in a way that is uplifting the players and empowering their choices. I think that's the important distinction here.
That's exactly right. That's another critical thing for running a successful role-playing game. It's about the players. It's their story. And they're the ones that make it fun. They're the ones that bring the fun. You supply an environment, but it's really about them doing the fun that makes it really cool. Makes it unique.
You
say yes a lot, but I don't say yes in a way that is abstract. Right? The storytelling systems build in this abstraction that you can.
I am going to write that down because I love that.
Yeah, and so there's systems that have wonderful things where it's like you can just say, "Oh, I've got a piece of equipment for that," or "Oh, I brought dynamite," or "I know a guy." Right? This is a new favorite one. I know a guy, which is great for a certain kind of role playing. It's terrific. Exactly what you want. Oh yeah, I'm a gangster, so I know a guy, and we can get this and that, whatever. I don't want that in Call of Cthulhu because these are largely regular people, and I don't want that abstraction. The player can ask me, "Do I know anybody who can help me dispose of a body?" And I might say, "Oh yeah, you do." I often will do this.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Bill Salmon, he can help with that. He runs a parking garage, and they have a lot of cars. Whatever. And I'll make it up on the spot. I'll pretend that I've got it in my notes. That's one of the reasons people think I have really more extensive notes I have. I might actually have this person in my head already, or I might not. So the answer is still yes, but it's not yes because you did it. I think that there is just as much as the old school style has huge problems if you really are rigid to that. And, if you go down the full road and see it as a competition that some people do, there's a huge problems with that that aren't fun. There are some problems that can come out of the joint storytelling side as well, which is that when the rules are structured that way, you can end up in a battle of wills between the GM and the player, or the players and the players, right? As people are trying to be wittier, more charismatic, more forceful, because they are literally affecting how the world works when they do that. But it's important that Call of Cthulhu existential horror does not work that way.
Yeah, and in that case where you're running when you're running a more free-form open improv game, camera time, which in this sense is a portmanteau for player interaction and that sort of thing, really has to be carefully controlled, because you can totally end up with two people driving everything and then the rest of the players trying to get their stuff in on the edge. And so as the GM, you really have to be careful to make sure that everybody's getting their moments to shine.
That's important in any game as well. Right?
Yeah. We're sort of skirting around a big thing here, which is the kind of railroad versus sandbox question. And, you and I have talked about this before, and I'm sort of, I know where we're starting and I know where we're ending up. You guys get me there. And so, I have like a sandboxy railroad where, the railroad starts here and it's going to end here, but you're going to build it all through here. And, I think, as I was sort of saying to you, I think it's always it's a spectrum in that regard.
So it is a spectrum, or can be seen that way. And I hear this talked about a lot on podcasts these days.
But it also could be a false choice.
Yeah, and that's what we talked about before. Is I feel it's a false choice very strongly. That it's a false choice. So you hear about it talked about as a spectrum. The very names sandbox and railroad tells you which one people think is good and which one you think is bad. But
I love trains.
But sandbox is exceptionally rare. And if you run a sandbox game, if you truly run the sandbox game, you very often Bride's murder hobo approach, right? Oh, you can do what you ever want. Well, now the players have no idea what they want to do, right? And,
Yep.
they might have a quest or might have, but they end up killing people and looting them. It's largely what happens if you create a rather true sandbox. Now, the railroading side, I would probably prefer to fail on the railroading side than the sandbox side because there's ways to make it not seem quite so railroady. But railroading can be a problem if you feel disenfranchised and your choices don't matter. And I've been in games where it's obvious that the DM wants a path thing, and so some players are trying to walk the path, some people are skirting the path to see how much they can push it, whatever. But it becomes about the path; it doesn't become about the game anymore.
Yeah.
That's a huge problem.
And there's always one deconstructionist who like is going to try and go the other direction.
Yeah, and resist being led around by the nose and whatever. That's just as problematic. I don't see it either on those spectrums very well at all. I think of it in terms of story hooks, and you lay out hooks all over the place, and you make it you direct where the players want to go, right? You give them options instead of just saying, okay, well, here's a map, pick a direction. You have to lead them into the story, and once you hook them in, you can see what hooks work, and then you start laying other traps. Whatever. Meanwhile, you try and pick up what hooks the players are intentionally or unintentionally giving you. Right? They will say things about what their interests are, or they'll ask specific questions about things, and all this, and they will lead wonderful places. And you say yes to the hooks. Again, my style, I don't typically tell them in a abstract way. Oh, I'm controlling this because you do that. Sometimes you have this, but for the most part, I just make it so. And just have that start to go that direction. And these things can become really defined for characters and players, and pretty soon you're in this blurry landscape where it's not clear if it's railroad or sandbox. But I can't write an internal world, right? I don't have time for that. Nobody's got time for that. And even if you do, it doesn't give you the results you want.
Yeah, it wouldn't be good, if you. So do you approach that differently for a one shot versus a campaign?
Not exactly differently. It's just a question of pacing, right? Well, I guess it's true in the sense that I can't react to the player hooks as much in a one shot because we just don't have the time. The scenes are set. You can pick up on little things, but mostly you lay the hooks in the character description because generally they're not making their own characters, so they have the hooks there. So I know what the hooks are that they're likely to go for. All that kind of stuff. I know what their skills are. I've done the relationship map that I pointed at. I spent a lot of time writing up characters because you're trying to fit into a page, but you're trying to give them relationships with other people, knowledge of their background, what occurred, all this stuff. It can be very complicated to try and condense that well into a page.
Yeah, I think if there's one takeaway, if you're running a con game, spend your time on character creation and making character hooks that will get the players going at the table. That is going to be the most bang for your time in that sort of thing. And sitting down at a table and having that good character thing as a player just makes me more excited about the game.
Yeah, it does put me, because I put a lot of time and I strongly believe in the craft. I'm very devoted to that. It does leave me a little brittle in a couple of ways. I can get pretty miffed with people if they completely leave the rails of the character. And when they're metagaming against the character as written, it can screw up the game because that character's there for a reason. And B, it's just like, why did I prep? Why am I writing stuff if you decided this character's going to just be, going to go off in this direction? In fact, I've kind of given up on having priests as characters, even though they're called through the trope, because almost, I'd say 75% of the time, the player plays them as a pedophile. And I get the problem, but, it's kind of a sticky joke. But A, there's not really a reason for pedophilia to come up in the scenario in the first place, so we wouldn't know if they were or not. And B, it's just like, did you read the character? So
where'd you get that? Yeah.
Where did that come from? It's been an ongoing problem, so that I kind of have to skirt.
Wow. If that, that's a good table management question. because I've had situations where I ran a game about that was dealing with a lot of tension between the Chinese and the American population in 1900 in San Francisco, and there was one player who said the Great White Race one more time than I was comfortable with, and it was dealing. I had to deal with that at the table, and so how do you kind of? It's different. This is another thing that is wildly different: con game versus home game. Because home games, the people, everybody's a little looser. You've got the boundaries are clear, but because the folks at a con game, when you have a player who's bringing something that I'm going to use the term inappropriate as just as is bringing something inappropriate, like how do you kind of manage that?
So it can be tough. There's some games that are really geared towards dealing with race or other underrepresented people, whatever. There's games that are dealt with that very sensitively, where the whole game is really written about that, and they have boundaries set up there, and they very often you have discussions about that. I think if I was going to have a game where racial tension was part of the built-in scenario, we'd have to have that discussion before we started playing.
Yeah.
If you know that you're going into controversial territory, just get out there what your expectations are right at the beginning, or it's just too risky. In terms of safety mechanisms, there's a bunch. X cards are popular. I haven't used them a lot. I may have to use them more. I did run into a problem where things went south at the table, and it was nobody's fault. It literally was nobody's fault. It was just different perspectives and different sensitivities. I don't think anybody did anything wrong, and yet, it was hard for people. It did mar the game experience for people.
Well, a key part of the X card is, not having it be it's not a blame thing. There's no, you call the X card, no problem. That scene ends. That's I'm actually become a big fan of veils, which is, sort of taking 5 minutes before the game starts to just say like, all right, everybody give me 2 or 3, if you've got something, give me some, like if you've got a thing with spiders, just let me know. And we won't have that come up. And I know, again, that goes to the home game versus con game thing where, if I'm running a home game and I know somebody has a thing with spiders, I might play with that a little. But at a con game, I want to be, I want everybody to feel welcome at the table.
And typically, because it can be very difficult, sometimes people are very reluctant to, you don't want to put people in the spot necessarily before the game either.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I should say the best way to do veils, have people write things down. Just pass me a note with like 2 or 3 things. Yeah. Don't spotlight somebody and say, what don't you like? That's
exactly. I once had a thing where we were doing character creation and a new player had never played it before, and was the last pick and got the character who was the recent widower at the center of the mystery. And it turned out that she had lost her husband to cancer like 6 months before that, whatever. And I said, oh, okay, new rule, you get any character you want. You can trade with anybody you want. And she chose to play that character as it went forward. But holy mackerel, I did not want to force things on that thing. So one thing in Call of Cthulhu that I do use and I encourage people to kind of mention at the forefront is there's a lot, or can be a lot of short secret conversations in Call of Cthulhu. So I'll step out in the hallway with people quite a lot to tell them, oh, you're an evil cultist, or oh, your mind's been taken over, or whatever, or oh, I want everybody to think what you said was insane, so I'm just in here stalling so that people think we're talking about something important. And people will often ask for clarification of the character, and I ask them to do that secret because I don't want them reading off their character sheet, because then the other players are getting the voice of God as to what your character is about. And so I encourage people, if there's anything, just to call me out, I'll have a conversation. That way they can call me out. Nobody has to know that there's a problem, and I can try and deal with that thing. Sometimes it can be more complicated than others. I don't think that this one that I'm referencing I handled particularly well, but I didn't know everything that was going on. I hadn't realized everything was going on. And it was unfortunate because it marred what otherwise could have been a great game. And you only get so many of those in cons. So.
Yeah. I think, if you're listening at home and you want to run a con game, that 20 minutes that you spend at the start taking each player out for 5 minutes and just like going over their character with them is so valuable. It lets them ask you questions that they don't want to ask, especially if you're playing a game where people have hidden agendas or that sort of thing, or people have powers and that sort of thing. I think one trick is, even if I ran a game where I had one character who their whole shtick was there was nothing special about them at all, but you still make sure you take them out as well, and make them think they're in a mundane game.
Right, and I do that. I started doing that from game one. I took everybody out for the 5 minutes to talk about their character, and I do it just every time, all the time, because I don't want people to know, oh, there's nothing going on with that character, right? You don't want that to happen. You want there to be the possibility of something that's going on with every character, and because many people have gamed me many times, and sometimes there have been evil people in the party, and this and that, things or powers or whatever it is. I have to.
Sometimes jerk.
You have to have that conversation every time. And the other thing about characters that we didn't get to that I'll just throw in real quick is I write replacement characters because in Call of Cthulhu it's expected that you'll die. So I have replacement characters. I have several of them ready to go. And I very often, a trick that I use is very often those characters have key information that they start with, key information or abilities over and above what the starting characters have, because they're great tools for moving things along as you get further into you're already halfway or whatever, 2/3 through because people are dying. And now you need to get things back on track. Well, you can slap a character in there, put Boots the Cat in, and all of a sudden they have access to stuff that they did not have access to before.
Yeah, I think especially for a con game, that's a great way to get just kind of get over that sort of second act lull of like, how okay, we know they've got a warehouse somewhere. Hey, I know where the warehouse, like it can be as almost as artificial as that, but but also it's a way of I don't want to say incentivizing death, but I mean incentivizing death. It's a way of not making somebody feel like they lost for having their character die. Your new character is super cool, and here's how.
Right, yeah, exactly, and that's the thing. You don't want to get people attached to characters so they don't try and die. You don't want to incentivize death. You really don't. So the first core characters have the ability to do the adventure as is, and I have had scenarios where everybody survived. Be accused of not doing my job well in that case, I guess. But I have had people all survive Call of Cthulhu scenarios. But
I've never survived. I think I've died in every one of your games.
Well, I'm not saying that happens often. I had one run that was absolutely flawless. They did an absolutely flawless run, made a really stupid choice in the end, and everybody died. They solved the entire adventure and chose to get the reward from what was the Lantern Tap. And went to the center of the universe.
How do you organically keep backup characters? How do you weave them in? Some people, my buddy Gil, you come in the room and there's 15 pictures. And 6 of those people are going to get a lot more camera time, but the others are kind of in the background, and they always end up disappearing. They're sort of just pictures. But I've thought a lot about how do you kind of keep backup characters that are organic, that aren't just kind of like, this guy just showed up.
Well, I mean, there's 2 ways to do it primarily. Either they're part of the write-ups of the characters, so people they already know about, right? And you write in some backup characters that they know about. Maybe they're looking for someone. Even I've done that, right? They're looking for someone. People are they going to find that person? I don't know. It depends on if somebody dies. Right, but then you have some of the just showed up characters as well. But you have to write the relationship of that character in a clever sort of way. They have to have a hook that drives them to the party fiercely, and the players in the group have to have a reason to accept that.
Yeah,
at least initially.
One of the worst decisions I ever made in a game. I made a game where all of the backup characters were characters in the game that were happening, and it was a murder mystery. And so I was slowly killing off the backup characters. But the problem was I was playing 12 people. and the game became about that, not about, the story.
Yeah, I really try and keep them away from the story. And it's not always 100%. Sometimes they can seem mundane until they're not. Um, but typically I try and keep them up for some of which for that reason. I don't want to do so much. In a home game you can do the non-players, play the non-players, but I want to get away from that at a con game because I generally run for 6 people. You've got a limited scope. I'm a 6-hour guy. I know a lot of people are 4-hour people. I'm a 6-hour person. I'm an 8-hour person. I've gone that long. I'm typically a 6-hour person. But you only have so much time. You only have so much scenes, and you want it to be about the players. So there's non-players that they interact with, but I don't do a lot of that. So I don't want characters hovering.
See, and that's interesting because I had subconsciously realized that, because one thing that your games don't have is the I'm going to monologue villain. They it's usually a kind of decentralized alien, unknowable kind of evil thing, whereas I am one, and this is probably the frustrated theater person in me, but I am 100% the evil priest is now going to tell you exactly what, and I want to have a 20-minute scene where he points out all of your moral failings and makes you realize that you're the true monsters. And
I mean, you can get that in an end scene maybe, but one thing I alluded to before, but I didn't say clearly, I want this to be really clear when you're writing a Call of Cthulhu game. Do not have your mystery contain any single points of failure. Any place where it's like, if they don't get this clue, it stops.
Because they will fail.
Or they can fail.
Yeah.
And you don't also want them to have a single point of failure where they solve the mystery in the first hour. So those scenes, the first scenes, cannot possibly give them enough information, barring really stupid things happening, which can happen, but it should be very unlikely, and it shouldn't be part of the crafting of it. They shouldn't be able to solve it with the initial scenes. They have to bring things from different scenes together, and there should be redundancy in clues in different places and whatnot. I had one scenario where one of the scenes, I didn't realize at the time, was driven by one character, and the player who played that character played the character way off what my expectation was, and they withhold that information, and they never did that scene, and I realized, well, even though they could go on without that scene had some really important stuff that could happen that would be good to see. I wanted to be available, and it was withheld by a single point of failure because there's no other ends to that scene.
Yeah, that redundancy I think is huge, and it's something we're coming up on an hour here, so I'm loath to introduce a new topic, but I'm going to do it just because, and we're going to do this again because there's more to talk about. But one of the things that I find fascinating about your games is your use of puzzles. I think you do a really good job of integrating puzzles into games, which I find fascinating because I can't do it to save my life. I cannot. There's so many balance issues and so many, that single point of failure thing. But you I think have a really nice approach to it. Talk a little bit about how you use puzzles in games.
It's very much like character mapping. You map your scenes. So you get a piece of paper and you have a circle with what scene is it, and you might have notes about what clues they're getting. You have your idea of but those scenes have to point to other scenes, right? Which is not to say that the scenes are going to happen just the way they might have a scene happen in a parking lot instead of wherever. You have to be adaptable because once you start, it's up to them. But you point them to those different scenes and you map it so that you have multiple arrows going into the scenes, right? Because they might be looking for the fingerprints. Well, maybe they didn't find it here. But they failed their role, right? There's a lot of systems now that want you to fail forward. And again, that goes against how I want Cthulhu to feel.
Right.
If you feel like you're going to fail forward, it's a great way to keep mysteries going forward. So there's reasons for that. But I want them to feel like, oh yeah, we can totally fail. Oh yeah, that botched roll, that meant I failed. But those fingerprints can be somewhere else, right? As well. There can be. So you have different clues. If the fingerprints are the clue that they really need, they better be in a lot of places, and there better be somebody who's really good at finding fingerprints, right? So you've got some forensic ability. So you map out those scenes, you have them point, and you point them towards the final confrontation that you expect. And this is where I most often fail when I'm running I get worried about time, and I rush the very end, and then I finish early.
Yeah, that is the con curse for sure.
I finish a half an hour early. I don't generally finish a lot early, but I finish half an hour early, and I rush the final scene, which should be climactic. And I just go like, well, I screwed that up. Wow, I didn't. I'm rushing, so forget things were, just trust it, just let it go. And I generally pick the last role-playing time so that I can go over my time anyways. There's not another game in my room immediately after all this kind of thing. But it really comes down to that mapping. You have to know what the whole mystery is and who the people are and whatever. Then point, draw the arrows and why the arrows go there.
So you've had some literal puzzles in your game that were a little recondite, and how do you kind of build in those multiple, like I'm thinking of, I don't want to spoil a lot here, but I'm thinking of like you have that audio, the audio clues one, and that's kind of, that can be, that puzzle can definitely be, for somebody like me who's not a good puzzle person, that can definitely be a little bit of a wall. And so how do you kind of design around that?
That was a fascinating one. There's another version of this same thing that occurred at one of my home games. And I'll spoil the home game instead because I haven't done it called Clue. In the home game, there's a system I created called Paraverse, which is kind of it's like X-Files, called Clue, where you're an agency, you're so secret that you don't really exist, government, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And you've got weird people, and you're going out solving monster things, whatever. And there's overarching themes in your Monsters League, whatever. And one of the great things I just have to say about this, I really loved about it, is I had secret stats that the players didn't know about that would randomly be generated for the characters.
Oh, I like that.
That would come out as the play would go on. And so that was a real fun innovation in that particular system. Vegas, in this particular scenario, we have a computer genius as one of the characters, and they're trying to find where the big bad thing's going down. And there's a series of murders happening in the United States that they can see the relationships to, but they don't know what it is. And the trick is that if you follow the things, eventually it forms a pentagram. The dead center of the pentagram is Las Vegas. And the timing of each event is spaced so that last one's going to fall at the stroke of midnight on New Year's of 2000. So as we go into the new millennium, at that moment in Las Vegas is where it's going to happen. And that's why all the clues are pointing. So I had pre-prepped map diagrams with different shapes and different things stenciled in depending on how they found and how they interpreted those locations. And I just had them in a folder because I had this computer genius guy who was doing this. And so, people would say, is there a pattern and whatever? And someone would say, I don't know, it could be Chinese squares. I would hand him a sheet, but I'm a map, da-da-da. No, I don't think that's really going to line up because, and so it's as if it's set up with all the side computer jargon, whatever, so that he just printed this out of his supercomputer thing. And I just had a series that I just bam, bam, bam. So on that audio clue, the one that you're talking about, I have someone who's got sound, audio experience, whatever, as one of the people, obviously, I have those skills. And I actually broke down the tracks in various ways. There's backward mask stuff in there. There's various filters. And so when I had all of these tracks done, I had like 10 tracks on that CD. So I could say, that sounds weird. Can we isolate that sound a little better? Track 3. And then they're listening on the headphones, they're playing it on the speakers, whatever. Oh, that sounds like backward kind of thing. Oh, what language is that? It's a different character. Whose language is it? So you're bringing everybody in at the table. So when you get a clue that is so vibrant like that, like you have the handouts, or you have that was a really unique audio thing, you have that.
It's kind of a centerpiece. It really becomes a centerpiece.
Right. And it draws people, it really will draw people into that. So you typically get a lot of investment in those clues. I didn't do a lot of rolling for them to get that. I just figured, the roll was really about how long does it take you to do the thing. Because it's a mundane task, right? We're not going to, I drive from LA to San Francisco. Do we need to roll for that? We're not rolling against driving skill or whatever. we're only going to roll against driving skill if you need to drive from LA to San Francisco in 3 hours or something. Then, maybe we have some driving or something like that. But typically when you have that vibrant thing, you can get away with it, especially if the clues join other players into it. And most of the clues that were in, so there was one clue they had to get out of that, which was to drive them to a location, right? So I made that fairly plain in there. The rest of the clues were just additional information that they could or couldn't, and had other arrows pointing into those clues once they got to the key location.
It was layers and that. Yeah. So my version of that, I decided I was going to go at my biggest weakness, and I made a game that was centered around a puzzle. But I also knew that was my biggest weakness. So I created a map puzzle where the answer was whatever the players came up with. Like I let them spend the time of going like, okay, it's next to this, and there were like 8 possible answers. And I was just like, whatever one they come up with is the right answer, and so it gave them the feel of it without, the banging your head against a wall at the end. But I think that is kind of I don't think that's as satisfying in some ways.
I mean, it can be fine. It represents the two different approaches we're talking about, and even I could do that and have multiple solutions and be fine, as long as I don't give it away, as long as they realize, as long as they think, oh, that was the solution. But I do want to talk about another thing on the puzzles, which is the puzzles should be puzzles for the characters, not for the players.
Yeah, 100%.
You have to be careful about this, and this is why I don't do riddles. And I, generally speaking, a little different than virtual land, but I don't do labyrinths and mazes. Mazes are boring, for the most part, so you have to make the maze about something. Again, virtual tabletops have changed that a little bit, but we won't go there. But riddles are an example, right? So if you put a riddle forward, and you say it's about the character, the riddle doesn't matter, because it becomes a roll against their intellect or their riddle skill or whatever it is, and they know it or they don't know it, and blah, 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 blah. And it shouldn't matter whether the player knows it or not, right? If this guy doesn't know anything about riddles or whatever, and, even if that player's really smart and knows what the answer is, you know what I'm saying? It breaks the immersion.
Right. It's the player solving it, not the character. Which,
right. On the other hand, you can't separate the character from the player, so the players are looking at the clues and coming up with stuff, whatever. You don't want it to be strictly about dice rolls either. Well,
that's why I liked the map puzzle allowed for the players to do stuff, but the characters were the ones that got the knowledge to build to the solution. That's the trick there. So obviously we're going to do this again because there's so much more to talk about. But let's we're heading towards time here, so I want to just what are some systems that you haven't run that you really want to run?
So the system I most want to run that I haven't run is one that I haven't created yet. That's a Grail project for me. I've been working on for years that I want to get done. I'm hoping to run some tests with my wife. I've actually made the precursor system to that system successfully. Now I have to do that. We'll talk again about that someday.
We're going to do a whole session just on designing RPGs, because honestly, my brain doesn't even like mechanics of RPGs is a thing I can't even think about. So I'm really interested in future in talking about balance and all that, that stuff.
But hairy spreadsheets that I've got going. But in terms of published things out there, I think that there's some interesting things. I think Basin is one that I'm interested in, and it's basically a Scandinavian folklore version of Call of Cthulhu, if I was going to get the elevator pitch. Which is, I mean, it's different, but you are investigators solving problems and mysteries, but they're all centered around these creatures from Scandinavian folklore. And so, you have to understand what they're about, and you solve the problems much the way you would in a Call of Cthulhu adventure, in the sense of unraveling the mystery. And part of the shtick to it is that the creatures take on the form, to some extent, of what people believe they do. Right?
Okay.
Right. So
it's like Call of Cthulhu through Dogma 13. Everything's like dreary and dark and
rainy.
Yeah.
So there's also Aegon, I think it's called, which is
Aegon is really neat. Yeah, Aegon.
I haven't played it. I would love to, but it seems really well formed for what it does. And so it's ancient Greece. It's not allowing you to go home, and you're visiting these islands, each one of which is a thing. And but what really intrigues me about it is the style of play is meant to capture a Homeric, heroic thing. So the way you speak, the way you take actions is all in the, and then you roll the dice and find out that you have shamed your family.
Yeah, yeah.
And whatever it is. So that one intrigues me quite a bit. And the third one that I've heard a lot about that really intrigues me is Homebrew's Bride, of course, which is supposed to be a marvelous game. And I'm intrigued by it, and I know a fair amount about it, but I'm not sure I'm the one to run it. I've thought about that because originally I got excited about the idea of running that for some women I know because it's very focused on the female experience. So I was going to run, and I thought, I'm really the guy to run that scenario. Is that really going to work? And I thought about it. I think the only way I could really run that effectively is exactly the opposite. If I ran for all guys, so that we could try to kind of capture what the authors of that, because it's a very particular and set piece to try and give you this experience, just so that they could try and get some experience from it. Even then, I think probably someone with more direct experience would be a better person to run that. So I doubt that I'll ever run it, but I'm very intrigued by it.
Yeah, I think that's. I have not played that one. I watched it played at Big Bad Con a couple of years ago, and it's a really interesting experience. It's honestly, it's almost a LARP. It like has that kind of feel to it,
Yeah, not the sense that you're get up and physically.
Right. Not there's no costumes or anything like that, but just the it's so much. Yeah, it's so much more the relationships at the table and that sort of thing. It's so we end every Keep the Game Moving with the same thing. And you've already let me know that you have you're challenging the very basis, the premise of this. But
bring your podcast down to its knees.
But it's the Space Jam question. Martians invade the Earth, and they will destroy the Earth unless you give them a 4-hour awesome gaming experience. What experience are you giving them?
Okay, so here's the problem with the question, because I did some research, because I've never seen Space Jam. And
what?
I knew that this was a question because I watched one of your previous podcasts. And so I researched the plot of Space Jam and discovered that is not the plot of Space Jam. That's not how it works in Space Jam. Martians are not destroying the Earth. They're kidnapping basketball players. That's it. And so, and here's the thing also.
You got to raise the stakes.
No, but here's what makes the question wrong also. In Space Jam, they have to win the basketball game to save the Earth or whatever. In this case, they're actually just saving basketball players and keeping Michael Jordan from winning for the planet. Whatever. You can't win a role-playing game, right? So you can't. To me, it breaks down. So what you're really asking is what I'll reframe as the Lilo and Stitch question, where they convince the aliens that mosquitoes are an endangered species, so Earth must be preserved. Or Penn and Teller have the invisible string gag thing, which they convince the aliens that they came up with this thing, and the aliens know it's a gag. But they say, well, anybody would come up with that as their thing. It's kind of, Rick and Morty did the music one, whatever. It's been done. So I kind of get where you're going. So what is it that I would put out there that would impress the aliens? And I would go to Call of Cthulhu probably because it's my go-to for these things, especially in a 4-hour format. Holy mackerel, that's not a lot of time to save the Earth. I would probably want to go for something that is Call of Cthulhu and so horror and all that, but has a somewhat uplifting possible ending. Uplifting in terms of the humanity. That's something that's really about humanity. So I would probably go to a scenario called Book Club, which centers around retirees in a Texas retirement area, village, settlement, whatever, and their book club. And it is actually the one I alluded to before, where one person is the widow. And it concerns the increasingly horrific discoveries of what actually happened about her husband's death, and actually revealing the truth of that. It's kind of a ghost story, but it takes characters that are fairly disparate and brings them together over the course of the story in ways that I think are uplifting about humanity. I was very fortunate that me and my wife made DunderCon last year, which was the last con before COVID destroyed cons. so I got the chance to play that with my wife. So,
and I missed out. I just missed. Oh.
Yeah, and it was, the players were perfect in that the written in disagreements of the players, like some of them are a little bit elite faculty types, and some are blue collar construction guy, and these things, and they're all brought together in this book club. That's what brings them officially together, on how they're all friends now, but they have a relationship based around this book club. They don't have the same background, and the way they played that, the implied elitism that was played, deliberately played, that caused insults. We had some insults, and because the tension rose, they got out there more things, and then realized it, and then one character had to go apologize to another character, and it made their relationship stronger after that. And the priest character, which my wife played beautifully, and the disagreements with the very humanist faculty person, about what was best. And when they came to that moment where they realized, okay, we may see the universe very differently, but we both have exactly the same goal, which is to care for this person. And my wife managed to convince the other person, it's like, it doesn't matter whether you believe or not. Do you really think that she is a religious person? Do you really think now is the time to tear down her religious beliefs when we're trying to take care of her? And the other person had to say, oh gosh, I was so into myself that I hadn't thought of what I was actually doing, which was to help this other person. So these kinds of human stories occur in that adventure in a way. And so that would be what I'd go to.
All right, we're going to do a whole nother episode about this, because this scenario is, A, it sounds like something I would write, and B, it's the least you idea I can think of. I'm fascinated by this. You just spent an hour talking about how, Call of Cthulhu is built in to make the players feel small and all this stuff. And that, Cocoon as Call of Cthulhu is such a great idea.
Yeah,
and
it's all in there, though. It doesn't impress me. The scenario still presses down on the characters in fairly severe ways in some cases, and the reveals are bad. Things get revealed as bad.
But that lifting up of the humanity and the our differences make us stronger together, that sort of thing. That is just that is outstanding. That is one of the best answers we've had for that. But we're gonna spend time just going through that, because that's
one last thing about the scenario, because it's the exact game where the woman who's she's playing that widowed character. And back to my failings in rushing, that was a game that I rushed the end, and I deeply regret it, because we got to the end, they came a hair's breadth from succeeding and failed, and it just went whoa. And which is fine in Call of Duty. You're allowed to fail that way. That's considered a win. But it was because I forgot that the spirit of the husband was present and could influence things. And if I had remembered that and hadn't been rushing, it would have been exactly the opposite uplifting, because just at the point of failure, they could have been saved by their connection. This is a storybook kind of thing. Their connection across the grave could have reversed that and would have saved it, and it would have been a perfect run. And I screwed it up because I was worried about this.
Yeah, the timing of con games is it becomes the most important character in the game, unfortunately.
I rarely have problems with clock, except for my perceptions of clock. That's where my problem is.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, the way that you become so worried about it that you overcompensate. It's Colin, like I said, so much. We've got 2 more pages of things we could talk about, and we will. But this was a great first conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Is there a place folks can go to connect with you, see your work? You've got so Colin is also a board game designer. He's got a BGG page. He's designed several fine games. Is there anything you'd like to plug, Colin?
So I'm old. I do not have a good social media presence. I'm not on Twitter. I am on Facebook. I almost never post. Everybody knows when I'm at the cons, because that's when my posting shoots up.
Right.
Here's pictures of me doing stuff at the cons, whatever.
So what you're saying is find Colin on LinkedIn is really what.
Well, here's my LinkedIn thing, right? I lost my password and I haven't bothered to use it for 10 years. I've been at the university university for so many years that I don't feel like I have a purpose for a LinkedIn page. So I haven't updated.
No one has a purpose for LinkedIn.
Yeah, well, I tend to. That might be partially why I haven't bothered
Right.
to solve that problem. But so my game is no longer in print. The published one is long since out of print, so it's difficult to get. And anyways, it's called Bump of the Night. Play a group of monsters, my friend children.
Fun little game. Fun little game.
But it's not easy to get now and whatnot. I do.
Well, I got to put mine on eBay.
What's that?
I said I got to put mine on eBay.
There you go. Well, I know a guy who's got a couple dozen in the closet.
And they're signed.
They might get released. I don't know.
So, but I think one of the big ways people can connect with you is if you're in LA or if you're in the Bay Area, when we can have cons again, look for Colin's con games and more importantly, look for his hallway games. Although those are harder to get in, those are honestly harder to get into than because usually it's 6 of us have tracked him down and said, "You're running for us." And
yeah, you need to know the right person. Alex Manson, she often is the person who will say, "Alex, collect me 2 more players. We've got someone who dropped. They went to lunch at the one time. We got this." And so Shannon's also a good person to get into anybody's game anywhere in the Bay Area at any time.
But if you can go to a con, usually in the Bay Area, Kubla Con, DundraCon, I'm going to make sure he comes to Big Bad Con.
On the list.
Get in a Colin Dimock game. That is my advice. That's the way to connect with Colin. Get in a Colin Dimock game. That's what you do.
If not that, look for the bandana.
And look for the bandana. We play a lot of board games as well, so you can find him in the board game room. Folks, thank you so much for watching. Thanks for your likes and your subscribes. We really appreciate it. And don't forget, keep the game moving.